Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, we begin this reflection on a very important topic for our faith and peace of mind. In daily life, we all encounter people who criticize us, are jealous of us, or who speak with the intention of harming us. Sometimes, these words or behaviors can deeply hurt us, distract us from our goals, or even affect our relationship with Allah. Yet, in these moments, Allah offers us valuable guidance to carefully choose who we respond to and sometimes to simply ignore them. Ignoring someone does not mean being weak or lacking courage. On the contrary, it is an act of wisdom and self-control. It means understanding that some people are not worth expending our energy responding to their provocations. It means preserving our heart, our faith, and our serenity. Allah, in His infinite wisdom, teaches us that inner peace and patience are treasures we must protect. In this video, we will explore together why Allah encourages us to ignore certain people, how to recognize those whose words or actions do not deserve our attention, and the spiritual and practical benefits of this attitude. We will also see how the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, practiced this wisdom in his daily life and how we can apply it in our relationships today. Through this spiritual journey, our goal is to understand that willful ignorance of certain people is not an act of passivity, but an act of faith and discernment. It is about protecting our hearts, staying focused on what is essential and following Allah's guidance to lead a more peaceful and blessed life. 1. Religious context. In Islam, every piece of advice given by Allah carries profound wisdom, and knowing when to ignore certain people is one of them. The Quran and the Hadith teach us that not all human interactions deserve our energy, and that responding to every provocation can harm our faith and peace of mind. Allah says in the Holy Quran, "And do not be led astray by those who transgress and spread corruption in the earth." Surah Al-Furqan 25:63. This verse reminds us of the importance of remaining in control of our reactions to negative behavior and unfair criticism. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the perfect example of this wisdom. Throughout his life, he faced insults, mockery, and even physical attacks, but he always chose his responses wisely. In some cases, he ignored provocations to preserve his mission and his inner peace. In a hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim, the Prophet said, "The strong is not the one who overpowers others by force, but the one who overpowers himself when he is angry." This statement highlights that true strength lies in self-control and choosing not to respond to unnecessary provocations. Islam emphasizes patience and restraint. Ignoring certain words or actions does not mean accepting injustice or inactivity, but rather choosing not to waste one's spiritual and emotional energy. Negative interactions can be tests of our faith. Allah says, "Those who spend their lives and wealth for me, I will grant them paradise, and I will protect them from that which wrongs them." Surah Al-Imran 3:195. Learning to ignore those who seek to harm us is a form of spiritual expenditure. We save our energy for actions that are pleasing to Allah and beneficial to our faith. Furthermore, divine wisdom teaches us that each individual acts according to their level of conscience and piety. Some are guided by ego, jealousy, or resentment, and seeking to convince them or respond to their criticism can prove futile. Allah invites us to focus our attention on what is essential: our relationship with Him, our personal development, and our positive contribution to society. Ignoring those who sow hatred or discord then becomes an act of wisdom and obedience to Allah. Finally, the Quran reminds us that human behavior must always be aligned with divine wisdom. In Surah Fussilat 41:34, Allah says, "Good deeds and evil deeds are not alike. Repel evil with that which is better, and behold, the one with whom you had enmity becomes like a warm friend." Sometimes the best way to repel evil is simply not to respond to it, to remain calm, and not to be drawn into conflict. Willful ignorance in the face of certain provocations is therefore not only a way to preserve one's inner peace, but also an act in accordance with divine wisdom. Thus, the religious context clearly shows us that choosing to ignore certain people is a thoughtful and spiritually beneficial act. It is not passivity, but a behavior guided by faith, patience, and self-control, which allows one to protect one's heart, one's serenity, and one's relationship with Allah. 2. Types of people to ignore. In daily life, we encounter a variety of people whose words or actions can affect our peace of mind and faith. Allah advises us to discern who deserves our attention and who does not, in order to protect our heart and serenity. In this section, we will explore the types of people it is wise to ignore, and why this attitude is not only recommended, but beneficial for our spiritual life. 1. Those who speak with the purpose of harming. Some people have the sole purpose of sowing discord, unfairly criticizing, or hurting with their words. Responding to these provocations can quickly turn a neutral situation into a pointless conflict. Allah teaches us not to waste our energy on those who act maliciously. Ignoring their words is choosing to preserve our inner peace and not giving them the power to affect us. It is also a form of spiritual wisdom, as responding with anger or resentment can harm our faith and distance our hearts from the tranquility every believer seeks. 2. Jealous or envious people. Jealousy is a powerful emotion that drives some people to criticize or belittle others in order to feel superior or appeased. In the Quran, Allah mentions jealousy as a source of harm and temptation. Reacting to a jealous person can amplify their behavior and create unnecessary tension. Ignoring their remarks and staying focused on one's own spiritual path is a way to follow divine guidance and avoid being drawn into the negative emotions of others. 3. Hypocrites and manipulators. Some people present a pleasant facade, but their intentions are corrupt. They may act in underhanded ways, criticize behind closed doors, or manipulate situations to sow doubt and confusion. Confronting these individuals directly can often make the situation worse. Allah advises us to remain vigilant and not be led astray by those whose intentions are not sincere. Ignoring their provocations helps us preserve our integrity, protect our hearts, and remain focused on our religious and moral obligations. 4. Unfair or malicious criticism. Not all criticism is constructive. Some is offered solely to demean, humiliate, or create discord. Responding to this type of criticism can be exhausting and harm our inner peace. Allah teaches us that it is better to focus our energy on what is beneficial and not to be overwhelmed by negative words. Ignoring this criticism is an act of patience and discernment, showing that our strength lies in self-control, not confrontation. 5. Why responding can harm your inner peace. It is crucial to understand that responding to every attack or criticism is not always a sign of strength, but often a source of stress and distraction. Every emotional reaction expends mental and spiritual energy that could be used for positive actions or strengthening our faith. Ignoring those who seek to provoke us is an effective way to conserve this energy and remain calm, even in the face of adversity. It allows us to remain aligned with Allah's wisdom and maintain our emotional and spiritual balance. In short, Allah guides us to ignore those who act with malice, jealousy, hypocrisy, or unfair criticism. This willful ignorance is not a sign of weakness, but a conscious choice to protect our heart, our faith, and our serenity. By recognizing these types of people and learning to ignore them, we practice an act of wisdom, patience, and inner discipline, which brings us closer to inner peace and divine satisfaction. 3. Signs to ignore. In our daily lives, it is not always easy to know when to respond to someone and when to choose to ignore them. Allah offers us signs and guidance to help us discern these situations and protect our hearts, minds, and faith. Learning to recognize these signs is an essential step in correctly applying God's advice to willful ignorance. Repetitive and toxic behaviors. The first obvious sign to ignore someone is when their negative actions or words are repetitive. Some people have a habit of continually criticizing, belittling, or sowing discord. Reacting to every attack only reinforces this toxic cycle and drains our mental and spiritual energy. Allah invites us to recognize that some people will not change despite our efforts. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, often chose not to respond to repeated provocations, demonstrating that willful ignorance is an act of wisdom and patience. 2. Negative influence on faith or peace of mind. Another crucial sign is the impact that someone's words or actions have on our faith or serenity. If someone makes us doubt, plunges us into stress, anger, or resentment, it is best to reduce our interaction with them. Islam teaches us that preserving inner peace and purity of heart is a priority. Ignoring someone who threatens our peace of mind is not an act of cowardice, but a way to protect ourselves spiritually and remain focused on the obligations and goals pleased by Allah. 3. Lack of sincerity of intentions. It is also important to discern whether the people we interact with are acting sincerely. Some manipulate, hide their true intentions, or seek only to harm us for their own benefit. Ignoring these people is often the best strategy, as trying to convince them or respond to their provocations is futile and can even harm our reputation or serenity. Divine wisdom consists of recognizing the sincerity or insincerity of others' actions. 4. Unnecessary provocations and hurtful comments. Another indicator is the very nature of the words or gestures. If the comments are malicious, degrading, or intended to embarrass us, it is often best not to react. Allah values patience and self-control, and responding to unnecessary provocations only fuels conflict and diverts our energy from more important matters. Silence and willful ignorance can transform a potentially conflictual situation into an act of wisdom and self-control. 5. Repetition, despite warnings or advice. If a person continues their negative behavior despite your attempts at dialogue or reminders, it is a clear sign that ignoring them is necessary. Islam teaches us that patience has its limits, and that certain situations require protecting one's heart rather than attempting to change the other person. Ignoring these behaviors is an act of spiritual and mental preservation, aligned with Allah's guidance. In summary, the signs to ignore are clear: repetitive and toxic behaviors, a negative influence on faith and inner peace, a lack of sincerity in intentions, unnecessary provocations, and repetition despite warnings. Recognizing these signs allows us to practice conscious and beneficial ignorance. This is not an act of weakness, but a thoughtful choice guided by divine wisdom, patience, and the desire to preserve serenity and faith. By following these principles, we protect our hearts, remain focused on what is essential, and draw closer to Allah in our daily behavior. 4. Benefit of willful ignorance. Willfully ignoring certain people, when it comes to protecting our heart and faith, is an act that has many benefits, both spiritually and emotionally. Conscious ignorance inspired by the teachings of Allah and His Prophet peace and blessings be upon him, is not a sign of weakness, but a strategic and spiritual choice that allows us to preserve our serenity, energy, and positive relationships. 1. Inner peace and serenity. The first benefit, and arguably the most valuable, is inner peace. Constantly responding to criticism, insults, or provocations can create stress, anger, and anxiety. These emotions disrupt our balance and distance our heart from the tranquility sought in Islam. Ignoring those who seek to harm us helps us protect this serenity and remain focused on our faith and goals. The Quran emphasizes the importance of this inner peace. Those who believe and whose hearts find rest in the remembrance of Allah. The remembrance of Allah is a restorative for the hearts. Surah Ar-Ra'd 13:28. Willful ignorance thus becomes a tool for maintaining our emotional and spiritual balance. 2. Preserving positive relationships. Ignoring harmful provocation also helps preserve our relationships with those we truly care about. Reacting to anger, unfair criticism, or malicious words can generate conflicts that affect those around us. By choosing not to respond, we avoid unnecessary disputes and preserve relationships based on respect, affection, and kindness. This wisdom is in line with Allah's guidance. Responding to evil with good can turn an enemy into a friend. But sometimes, ignoring evil is the surest way to maintain harmony around us. 3. Focus on self, faith, and goals. Another major benefit of willful ignorance is the ability to focus on what truly matters: our spiritual development, our personal goals, and our relationship with Allah. Every reaction to provocation consumes mental and emotional energy. By choosing not to respond to provocations, we reserve this energy for beneficial actions, acts of worship, and positive initiatives in our daily lives. This focus allows us to progress on our spiritual path and move forward with serenity and clarity in our personal and religious endeavors. 4. Example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the perfect example of this wisdom. He faced insults, mockery, and even threats, but he chose his responses wisely. In some situations, he ignored provocations to protect his mission and his inner peace. His actions demonstrate that willful ignorance is not only an act of self-control, but also a way to avoid unnecessary conflict while remaining faithful to divine principles. Applying this wisdom in our daily lives brings us closer to his exemplary conduct and strengthens our faith. 5. Strengthening patience and self-control. Finally, willful ignorance develops patience and self-control, two essential qualities in the life of a believer. By choosing not to respond to provocations, we learn to control our emotions and not let anger or resentment guide our actions. This practice makes us more resilient in the face of challenges and allows us to make thoughtful decisions rather than reacting impulsively. Patience, in this context, becomes a powerful spiritual tool that protects our heart and our faith while bringing us closer to Allah. In summary, willful ignorance offers multiple benefits. It brings inner peace, preserves positive relationships, focuses our energy on our faith and goals, provides a concrete example inspired by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and strengthens our patience and self-control. By following this divine advice, we transform a seemingly simple act into a source of spiritual strength and lasting serenity, allowing us to live a more balanced and focused life. 5. How to practice this ignorance. Learning to ignore certain people and situations is as much a spiritual as it is a practical art. Allah does not ask us simply to turn a blind eye to provocations, but to do so with wisdom, patience, and discernment. This section offers concrete methods for practicing this willful ignorance, while remaining polite, balanced, and connected to our faith. Wow. Distancing oneself from criticism with discernment. The first step is to understand that not all criticism deserves a response. Some comes from a malicious, jealous, or hypocritical people, and responding to their attacks only strengthens their power over us. It is important to distinguish between constructive criticism and unnecessary criticism. Constructive criticism should be received with humility and reflection, while criticism intended to hurt should be ignored. This capacity for discernment is a spiritual practice. It teaches us to protect our hearts and minds while remaining open to personal improvement. 2. Invocation and dependence on Allah. Willful ignorance is not only an act of physical or verbal withdrawal, it is also a spiritual act. When we face negative people, it is beneficial to recite invocations, du'as, to ask for protection, patience, and inner strength. For example, asking Allah to purify our hearts, remove grudges, and grant us serenity is a powerful way to stay centered. This dedication to Allah transforms ignorance into an act of faith, as we rely not only on our own strength, but also on divine guidance and protection. 3. Techniques for remaining polite but distant. Ignoring someone does not mean becoming rude or aggressive. It is about maintaining a respectful distance, avoiding unnecessary confrontations, and responding only when necessary. Simple techniques can help. Responding with neutral phrases, changing the subject, limiting the time spent interacting, or simply listening without engaging in debate. This approach allows us to protect our emotional energy while maintaining respectful relationships, especially in family or professional settings. 4. Self-control and patience. Self-control is at the heart of this practice. The temptation to respond to provocations can be strong, but every impulsive reaction drains our energy and risks making the situation worse. Patience, taught by Allah and exemplified by the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, allows us to remain in control of our emotions. Practicing willful ignorance requires breathing, refocusing, and consciously choosing not to react to negative words or behaviors. This self-control is a victory over external influences and a way to increase inner serenity. 5. Prepare your environment mentally and spiritually. A regular practice consists of preparing in advance for potentially difficult situations. This can include mentally visualizing conversations in which we remain calm, reciting verses or prayers before stressful encounters, or constantly reminding ourselves that impulsive reactions do not serve our faith. The more we practice mindful ignorance, the more it becomes a natural and beneficial habit. 6. Transforming ignorance into positive energy. Ignoring provocations should not be a simple passive withdrawal. This saved energy can be used for positive actions, praying, meditating, helping others, or strengthening our sincere relationships. Thus, willful ignorance becomes an active method for cultivating inner peace and goodness around us, rather than simply avoiding problems. In summary, practicing willful ignorance involves discerning between useful and useless criticism, connecting with Allah through supplication and prayer, maintaining a polite and respectful distance, self-control and patience, mental and spiritual preparation, and transforming saved energy into positive actions. This holistic approach not only protects our heart and faith, but also allows us to live in serenity, wisdom, and self-control in accordance with the divine teachings. 6. Testimonies and examples. To better understand the importance of willful ignorance in the life of a believer, nothing beats concrete examples, whether from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, or from Muslims facing similar situations. These stories show how choosing not to react can protect faith, serenity, and dignity. Listen to 1. Examples from the life of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. The Prophet Muhammad faced many situations where individuals sought to provoke or denigrate him. A famous example is that of the inhabitants of Ta'if, who rejected him, insulted him, and even had him attacked by children and vineyard guards. Rather than respond with anger or revenge, the Prophet chose to leave without anger, invoking Allah to guide his people. This reaction demonstrates the power of willful ignorance. It protects the heart, prevents violence, and strengthens dignity. 2. Managing jealousy and contempt. On many occasions, the Prophet's companions faced jealousy or unfair criticism. For example, some people mocked poor Muslims or criticized them for their faith. Those who followed the Prophet's example often chose not to respond, not to harbor grudges, and to focus their energy on good deeds and worship. Willful ignorance allowed them to remain calm and strengthen their faith despite external provocations. 3. Testimonies of contemporary Muslims. Even today, Muslims recount how ignoring certain criticisms changed their lives. For example, people faced with envious colleagues or hostile family members chose not to respond to the provocations. Instead of wasting their energy justifying or defending themselves, they invested their time in prayer, learning, or serving others. The result? They found inner peace and spiritual strength that no amount of argument could have provided. 4. Lessons learned. These testimonies and examples show that willful ignorance is not an act of weakness, but a strategic and spiritual choice. It protects faith, preserves the heart from bitterness, and allows us to focus on what is truly important: worship, personal growth, and kindness to others. Each example, whether prophetic or contemporary, reminds us that self-control and patience are invisible forces that strengthen our relationship with Allah. In summary, the stories from the Prophet's life, the experiences of the companions, and the testimonies of modern-day Muslims illustrate that willful ignorance is a powerful tool. It allows us to transform negative situations into opportunities for inner peace and strengthening our faith. These concrete examples bring divine teachings to life and show how they can be applied in our daily lives to lead a more serene and purposeful existence. In conclusion, it is important to return to the central message. Allah teaches us to ignore certain people or situations when their influence is harmful to our heart, our faith, or our serenity. This willful ignorance is neither a sign of weakness nor an act of cowardice. It is a conscious, spiritual, and strategic choice that protects our energy, our patience, and our emotional balance. We have seen that choosing not to react to provocations, unfair criticism, or negative behavior has many benefits. First, it brings inner peace, the tranquility we all seek in a world that is often hectic and filled with conflict. It preserves positive relationships, as responding to provocation often leads to unnecessary arguments and resentment. It also allows us to focus our energy on what matters most: our relationship with Allah, our personal goals, and our commitment to beneficial actions. Examples from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, perfectly illustrate this wisdom. Faced with mockery, insults, and difficult situations, he knew when to respond and when to remain silent, always guided by patience, self-control, and trust in Allah. His companions followed this example, and contemporary Muslims still testify to the power of this approach for living a more serene and faith-centered life. Practicing willful ignorance requires discernment, patience, and self-control. It involves distinguishing useful criticism from malicious attacks, detaching ourselves from negative emotions, and investing our energy in positive and constructive actions. It is also an act of faith, as we place our trust in Allah, seek His protection, and seek to act in accordance with His teachings rather than following our impulses or anger. By adopting this approach, we strengthen our spiritual resilience, develop our patience, and cultivate a pure and serene heart, capable of facing the challenges of daily life without alienating ourselves. Willful ignorance thus becomes a tool for personal and spiritual growth. It distances us from unnecessary conflicts while bringing us closer to divine guidance. Finally, let us remember that every moment we choose to remain calm, not respond to provocations, and place our trust in Allah is a victory over negative influences. Let us pray that our hearts may always remain guided, our patience strengthened, and our faith firmly anchored. May Allah help us apply this guidance in our daily lives, cultivate serenity, and transform every trial into an opportunity for growth and closeness with Him. So let us remember, ignoring those who seek to harm us when necessary is an act of wisdom, faith, and protection of our souls. May each of us put this divine guidance into practice, live with serenity, and remain on the luminous path traced by Allah and exemplified by the Prophet Muhammad. Peace and blessings be upon him.